Managerial Economics, Unit 4, Designing Markets and Organizations. Auctions. Auctions are becoming more and more common as a market mechanism to sell and buy products. One of the most prominent examples is the market for online advertising. Alphabet, the parent company of Google, is one of the largest companies in market capitalization and earns a significant portion of the revenue selling advertising through auctions. Auctions are a widely used mechanism by governments to purchase products and services, accounting for more than 5–10% of the world GDP. The recent wireless spectrum auction in Chile was used by the government to raise around $500 million, selling rights to the telecommunication companies to use radio frequency to operate cell phones. Running an auction is essentially a way of creating a market. The design and rules of the auction are important to determine the outcome, which bidders win, and how much they pay. In the course, we have explored strategies that companies or any seller can use to price products to maximize profit, but these strategies requiring a knowledge of the demand. Auctions can be a useful mechanism when the seller doesn't know about the willingness to pay of the buyers. There are a wide variety of auctions used in practice. We will study a classification of auctions and analyze how their design affect the way participants will bid in the auction. The first example is how the value of the item being auctioned can vary across the participants in the auction. In the case of private values, the valuation that each participant has on the item is independent of each other. For example, a concert ticket generates a specific value to each individual, and therefore each participant will have their unique willingness to pay. Typically, this willingness to pay is private information. A bidder knows their own value but doesn't know the willingness to pay of the other bidders perfectly. He may, though, have some idea of the range and distribution of these valuations across all the participants. Concert tickets and collection items such as fine art are examples of private value auctions. The other case is the common value auction. Here, the actual value that the item generates for each of the participants is exactly the same. However, participants don't know this value exactly and may have an estimate based on independent studies or other sources of information. A typical example of common value auctions are the auctions for oil drilling. Typically, the bidder doesn't know the actual value contained in an oil reserve. Governments sell off the right to exploit oil reserves using auctions, and participants conduct some research to evaluate how much the oil is worth. Other examples include auctions for treasury bills and timber auctions. Many auctions are a combination of private and common value. Part of the value of the item may be common to all participants, and some of it may be generated specifically for each participant, generating a private value. Another dimension in which auctions differ is on how the bids are disclosed to participants. In open outcry auctions, bids are offered sequentially and visible to all the participants. Bidders disclose their bid publicly as the auction progresses. In a sealed bid auction, the bids are submitted privately. The sellers receive all the bids and then announce the winner, the highest bid, and may disclose the bids only after the auction is closed. For sealed bid auctions, another relevant rule of the auction is the amount paid by the bidders. In a first price auction, the winner pays his own bid. In a second price auction, the winner pays the second highest bid. In an all-pay auction, all the participants pay regardless of whether they win or not. We will focus on first and second price auctions, which are more commonly used in practice. The dimensions presented are variables that can be adjusted in the design of an auction. The participant strategies to bid will vary depending on whether the auction has private or common value, and depending on the payments rules that are implemented. In turn, the strategies that bidders use will also affect the payments that the seller gets for the item. Hence, the design of the auction is relevant both from the participant perspective and the seller's perspective. We will begin analyzing how auction design can affect the bidding strategies of the participants. Given the rules of an auction, how should a participant plan their bidding strategy? In an open outcry auction, participants make their bids publicly, usually moderated by an auctioneer that coordinates the bidding process. In the English and Japanese auction, the prices increase progressively until a single bidder remains. These are called ascending auctions. We have used some of these auctions in class to illustrate how to build a demand. In other types of auctions, the descending auctions, also called the Dutch auctions, the bids start high and then go down progressively. The first participant to raise their hand wins and pays the standing price. Notice that in this type of auction, only the winning bid is revealed.
We will use the following example to illustrate how different types of auctions work. Macal is a company that specializes in selling real estate through auctions. Here, we'll look at an auction for a property in Rio Ibáñez, in the south of Chile. Your willingness to pay for this property is $342. There are other bidders in the auction, but you don't know exactly their willingness to pay. How much should you bid on this auction? To answer this question, we need to know the rules of the auction. We will start by considering an English auction that starts with a price of $250. The bids will go in increments of 10 on each round, and all the participants will indicate if they continue bidding at the standing price. The process continues incrementing prices until only one bidder remains. The bidder wins the property and pays the standing price. The bidders that didn't win pay nothing. What will be your optimal bidding strategy in this case? It turns out that the bidding strategy in this auction is very simple. You just keep bidding until the standing price exceeds your willingness to pay. Consider a case where the standing price is below the willingness to pay. If you stop bidding at that price, you may lose the chance of winning the unit if all other bidders drop below your willingness to pay. In that case, had you kept bidding, you would have earned the property and earned a profit. Also, it doesn't make sense to continue bidding once the standing price exceeds your willingness to pay. Because in this case, if you win, you will end up paying more than your willingness to pay, and hence get a negative profit. So bidding until the standing price reaches your willingness to pay is a dominant strategy in this auction. Notice that this strategy doesn't depend on the strategies of the other bidders. It's a dominant strategy to bid until the standing price reaches your willingness to pay. Let's now consider a different type of auction, a first price sealed bid auction. Here, each participant submits their bid privately without revealing to the rest. We start with a minimum price of $250, so all bidders should submit something above $250. The seller takes all the bids and shows the highest bid. This is the winning bid, and the bidder is allocated the property. The losing bidders do not pay anything in this auction. Only the winning bidder pays their bid. Your willingness to pay here is again 342. How much would you bid? Notice that bidding your willingness to pay in this type of auction, it's never a good strategy. Why? Because if you win, you end up getting zero profit. So to make a profit in this type of auctions, you need to submit a bid that is below your willingness to pay. We call this shading your bid. Later in the course, we will analyze what type of information is needed to determine a reasonable amount of shading to obtain a profit in this type of auctions. Now let's consider a third type of auction. It's very similar to the previous one, but with a very small change in the design. It's still a sealed bid auction where the bids are submitted privately. But now the winner, the highest bid, doesn't pay their bid, they pay the second highest bid. Let's see how this small change affects the bidding strategy and how this strategy is also affected by the information that the participants may have on the other competitors in the auction. We will see that the strategy in a sealed bid second price auction is very simple. You just need to submit a bid that is equal to your willingness to pay. This simple strategy works regardless on the information available on other participants in the auction. Using our game theory vocabulary, bidding your willingness to pay is a dominant strategy in this auction. It is the best you can do for every possible strategy of your competitors. To illustrate this, consider R as the best bid of the rival participants in the auction. B is your bid. We will show that choosing B equals to your willingness to pay is a dominant strategy. Notice that if your bid is higher than the best bid of your rivals are, you win. The value you obtain by winning is your willingness to pay minus the second highest bid. Remember that in this auction, you don't pay your bid, you pay the second highest bid, which in this case will be the highest bid among all the other participants, which bidded below you. If R is higher than your bid, then you lose and get a value of 0. Let's consider the case in which you bid B below your willingness to pay. So B is less than 342. If the best rival bid, R, is above your willingness to pay and also above your bid, then you lose and you get a payoff of 0. If R is below your bid and you bid it below your willingness to pay, you win the auction and earn a profit of 342 minus R. You don't pay your bid, you pay the second highest bid. Now, if the best rival bid R is below your willingness to pay but above your bid, you lose and you get a profit of 0. Notice that if you bid your willingness to pay of 342, there's two possibilities. Again, if the rival bid is above your willingness to pay, you lose and get a payoff of 0. But if the rival bid is below B, your bid, you win and get a payoff of 342 minus R. So notice that the third case presented above is dominated by actually bidding your willingness to pay. In that case, if had you bid your willingness to pay, you would have won the auction and realized a profit out of it. So bidding your willingness to pay weakly dominates bidding any number below your willingness to pay. Using the same logic, we can now show that bidding above your willingness to pay is also dominated by bidding exactly your willingness to pay. When you bid above your willingness to pay, the scenarios are: first, you could lose the auction when the rivals outbid you, that is, when R is above your bid. Okay, you could win the auction and you could win the auction and your rivals were bidding below your willingness to pay, in which case you would win and earn a profit. And the third case is a case in which you won the auction, but because you bidded a higher price, a higher bid than your willingness to pay, and your rivals also bidded above your willingness to pay, you end up with a negative payoff. Okay. Had you bid exactly your willingness to pay, you would get the same payoffs in scenarios 1 and 2, but you would avoid the third scenario in which you obtain a negative profit. So bidding your willingness to pay weakly dominates bidding any number above your willingness to pay. As we've seen, English and second price sealed bid auctions have a simple dominant bidding strategy. This strategy is independent of the number of bidders and the strategy of the participants in the auction. We say that the ascending auctions and the second price sealed bid auctions are strategically equivalent. For any given set of participants and their willingness to pay, the auctions should lead to the same winner and the same payments. In contrast, first price sealed bid auctions and the descending open outcry auctions require knowledge of the competitor's strategy and do not have a dominant strategy for the bidders. They require shading your bid below your willingness to pay, and this shading will depend on the strategies of the other participants.